I remember exactly where I was when my son James called me with the wonderful news that would change our family forever. I was kneeling in my garden, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil, carefully planting new petunias and marigolds for the approaching spring season. The afternoon sun felt warm on my back, and the scent of freshly turned earth filled the air around me. His voice sounded so genuinely happy and excited when I answered the phone, a tone I hadn't heard from him in quite some time. He told me that Chloe was pregnant, and they were expecting their first child in about 6 months. I was so completely overwhelmed with pure happiness that I actually cried tears of joy right there among my flowers, the droplets mixing with the soil on my gardening gloves. I had been waiting for this beautiful moment for years, secretly dreaming of the day I would finally become a grandmother and have a little one to spoil with love and attention. I immediately offered to help them prepare everything for the baby's arrival, from painting the nursery to shopping for baby clothes, thinking this wonderful news would naturally bring our family closer together than ever before in shared anticipation and joy. Looking back now with the clarity that hindsight provides, I should have noticed the subtle warning signs much earlier in their relationship, even before marriage was ever discussed. Chloe had always seemed slightly uncomfortable, almost stiff and distant around me from the very first day James introduced us. She came from what people often call old money, with generations of family wealth and privilege that created a subtle but noticeable divide between us. She had very specific, unyielding expectations about how proper life should be lived, from the right schools to attend to the appropriate social circles to maintain. I had naively thought the baby might finally break down those invisible but strong walls she had carefully built between us over the years. I genuinely believed a child would bring us together in shared love, excitement, and the magical experience of welcoming a new generation into our family. Unfortunately, I was completely wrong about that hopeful assumption, as time would soon clearly show me in the most painful and heartbreaking way possible, teaching me difficult lessons about family dynamics I never expected to learn. As Chloe's pregnancy progressed month by month, her belly growing rounder with my grandchild, she became increasingly controlling about every single minute detail surrounding the baby's arrival into the world. She firmly rejected all of my thoughtful baby gift suggestions with polite but dismissive comments, saying they weren't the right designer brands she had carefully researched and selected for her unborn child. She barely let me touch anything in the nursery in progress or help with the elaborate decorating scheme she had chosen from high-end catalogs, treating my offers of help as intrusions rather than the loving gestures they were intended to be. I started feeling like a complete outsider in what should have been a shared, joyful family experience, systematically excluded from the happy preparations that grandmothers typically enjoy participating in with their expecting children. My excitement slowly turning to concern and then to sadness as the pattern continued week after week. When little Sophia finally made her dramatic entrance into the world on a rainy April morning, I rushed to the hospital immediately after receiving James's call, carrying a beautiful bouquet of spring flowers and the softest, most carefully chosen blanket I could find after weeks of searching. Chloe's mother was already there in the hospital room when I arrived, comfortably holding the newborn baby as if she naturally belonged there more than I did, the scene looking like a perfect grandmother moment that didn't include me. When I gently asked to hold my own granddaughter for the very first time, my arms aching with anticipation, Chloe gave me a cold, assessing look and said the baby was too fragile right now and needed to bond with immediate family first. Her words creating a physical and emotional barrier between me and my grandchild right from the very beginning of Sophia's life. The difficult, lonely months that followed Sophia's birth were filled with constant, creative excuses about why I couldn't visit them or see the baby for more than a few hurried minutes. According to Chloe's detailed explanations, the baby was always sleeping at the precise times I was available, or had another doctor's appointment scheduled during my visiting hours, or she herself was simply too tired and overwhelmed for visitors despite having other guests regularly. When I did manage to visit their home occasionally after persistent pleading, I was only allowed to watch my granddaughter from a careful distance, like she was a precious museum exhibit rather than family, never permitted to hold her or interact closely. I felt like I was being deliberately punished for reasons I couldn't understand or identify, systematically shut out from a relationship that should have been natural, loving, and automatic between a grandmother and her only grandchild, the rejection deepening with each passing week. The Christmas family gathering became the final heartbreaking straw for me emotionally, the moment when hope finally crumbled into resignation. I brought beautifully wrapped presents featuring teddy bears and rattles and a large tin of my famous homemade cookies that James had always loved as a child, hoping to create a warm holiday memory. When I naturally reached out to hold little Sophia, who was dressed in an adorable red velvet dress with matching hair bow, Chloe physically pulled her away from me in front of everyone gathered in their living room. "I don't think that's a good idea today," she said loudly enough for other family members to hear clearly, her voice cutting through the cheerful holiday music. "Your hands look a bit shaky today, and I wouldn't want you to accidentally drop her." Her criticism hung in the air between us like frozen breath on a cold day, both embarrassing and deeply painful in its public delivery and implications about my capabilities. I looked down at my hands, which were perfectly steady despite the emotional moment, my fingers showing none of the tremor she had invented as justification. Then the painful truth finally dawned on me with crystal clarity, washing over me like a cold wave of realization. This wasn't actually about my hands or my physical capabilities at all, nor was it about any genuine concern for Sophia's well-being. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy to keep me systematically away from my only grandchild for reasons known only to Chloe, part of a pattern that had been building since her pregnancy began. I left their Christmas party early that afternoon without saying proper goodbyes, my heart feeling completely broken into tiny, irreparable pieces as I drove home through streets decorated with cheerful holiday lights that seemed to mock my profound sadness and growing isolation from my own family. That long, lonely night after the Christmas disaster, sitting in my dark living room with only the twinkling tree lights for company, I made a firm decision that would change everything about our family dynamics forever. I had been originally planning to leave my entire estate, built carefully over decades of work, to James and his growing family in my will, assuming they would cherish both the memory and the security it provided. But why should I leave everything to people who consistently treated me as unimportant, unworthy, and potentially incompetent? I needed to completely rethink my inheritance plans from the ground up, creating something that would actively protect my relationship with my granddaughter rather than simply rewarding those who prevented it, using the very resources they seemed to value more than our relationship as leverage for connection. What my family didn't know about me, what I had never shared with anyone outside my business life, was that I hadn't just been an ordinary stay-at-home mom all those years while James was growing up, despite that being the image I presented. I had quietly built a remarkably successful business during those years when he was in school, starting with a single small hotel and gradually expanding through careful planning and reinvestment. I actually owned a small but increasingly profitable chain of boutique hotels that operated under a completely different management name, deliberately hiding my involvement from everyone in my personal life who might treat me differently because of my financial success or make assumptions about my capabilities based on wealth rather than character. My wonderful business partner, Barbara, handled all the public-facing aspects of our growing hotel business beautifully, from ribbon-cutting ceremonies to press interviews, while I preferred working behind the scenes. I personally focused on strategic planning, financial management, and the creative direction where I could concentrate on the work itself rather than the social aspects of business ownership that never appealed to me. This careful separation of roles meant that nobody in my personal life, including my own son and his wife, knew the true extent of my business success or personal wealth. Assuming my comfortable but modest lifestyle reflected my actual financial situation. I had always liked keeping these two worlds completely separate, valuing my privacy and the genuine relationships it enabled, but now I saw the strategic advantage this privacy gave me in addressing the painful family situation that had developed. The Monday morning after that terrible Christmas incident, the first business day of the new year, I called my lawyer first thing in the morning while the memory of rejection was still fresh and painful. I told him directly and without preliminary small talk that I wanted to make some significant, important changes to my last will and testament, changes that reflected the current family reality rather than my previous hopeful assumptions. He asked me in his professional yet genuinely concerned voice if everything was all right with my family relationships, having known our family for many years and witnessed its happier times. I told him honestly that no, everything was definitely not all right, and that's precisely why I needed to make these strategic changes to protect my interests and the relationships that mattered most to me, using the legal tools available to ensure I wouldn't be completely shut out of my granddaughter's life. After careful consideration over several days, weighing different approaches and their potential consequences, I decided to create a substantial trust fund specifically for Sophia's future that would pay for her entire education from preschool through graduate school and provide a generous financial inheritance when she turned 25 years old. But there was one very important, non-negotiable condition attached to this inheritance that would determine whether she ever received these funds, a requirement designed to protect our relationship rather than undermine it. This condition would legally safeguard what mattered most to me, the opportunity to build a genuine, loving relationship with my granddaughter throughout her childhood, creating memories and bonds that should form naturally between generations but were currently being prevented. The condition I created was actually quite simple and reasonable in my view, something any grandmother would expect as normal, but that I now needed to legally formalize. For Sophia to eventually access the trust fund, I needed to have a meaningful, genuine relationship with my granddaughter throughout her childhood years, documented through regular contact and shared experiences. Specifically detailed in the precise legal language drafted by my attorney, I needed to have regular, unsupervised visits with her throughout her childhood, creating the grandmother-granddaughter bond that had been deliberately denied to me so far through various excuses and barriers, ensuring I could be present for birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days alike. If Chloe deliberately prevented this relationship from properly developing despite my reasonable efforts and documented attempts to connect, the entire trust fund money would instead go directly to charity as an alternative, with no possibility of James or Chloe accessing it under any circumstances. I specifically named several respected children's hospitals and adult literacy programs that would receive everything instead, organizations that would actually appreciate and use the funds to help others in genuine need, turning my potential legacy for my granddaughter into a force for good in the world if family connection proved impossible due to her mother's interference. I formally invited James and Chloe to my home the following week for what I carefully described as an important family matter discussion requiring their immediate attention, choosing my words to convey seriousness without revealing the specific topic. Chloe almost refused to come initially, citing various previous commitments and what she called baby exhaustion, but James eventually insisted they should both attend, perhaps sensing this wasn't a routine family visit. They arrived at my house exactly on time, but looking visibly annoyed at what they perceived as an unnecessary interruption to their busy weekly schedule, clearly not expecting anything significant or life-changing from our meeting. Their body language suggesting impatience rather than curiosity about why I'd summoned them. I sat them down together in my comfortable living room where we'd shared so many family moments over the years, from birthday celebrations to holiday gatherings, now the setting for a very different kind of family conversation. My lawyer was already present in the room, which clearly made Chloe immediately uncomfortable and suspicious, her eyes narrowing as she noted his professional attire and the legal folder on the coffee table between us. She asked pointedly why we needed a lawyer present for what she called a simple family discussion, her voice taking on a defensive edge as she scanned the room for clues. I told her calmly that they would both understand the reason in just a few moments, once the formal proceedings began and the documents were explained, asking for their patience and open minds during what might be a difficult conversation. I began by explaining in measured tones that I had recently made some important changes to my last will and testament that they needed to know about now rather than after my passing, changes that directly affected their family's future. Chloe's eyes noticeably lit up at the mere mention of inheritance matters, her previous annoyance replaced by keen interest, while James looked more concerned than excited by the announcement. She actually smiled at me for the first time in many months, a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes, but was clearly meant to convey approval and perhaps anticipation. She clearly thought this meeting was about what material possessions and money they would eventually get from me after I was gone, assuming this was a routine update about assets and distributions rather than the strategic intervention it actually represented. Then my lawyer began reading the specific legal terms about the substantial trust fund I had created for Sophia's future, his professional voice calm and measured as he outlined the financial provisions and their conditions. He read the crucial condition about our required relationship slowly and very clearly, emphasizing each key point so there could be no possible misunderstanding about what was expected for the inheritance to eventually transfer to Sophia. Chloe's artificial smile disappeared completely from her face as the meaning of the words sank in, replaced first by confusion, then by dawning comprehension, and finally by a look of shocked anger that transformed her previously pleased expression into something hard and unpleasant, her hands tightening on the armrests of her chair. "You can't possibly be serious about this," Chloe exclaimed loudly, her voice shaking with outrage as she half rose from her seat, the words bursting forth as if she could no longer contain them. "This is nothing but emotional blackmail using money as a weapon." I calmly explained that it was actually about making absolutely sure I could have a normal, loving relationship with my only granddaughter, something that should have been automatic, but had become impossible without intervention. Something she had been deliberately preventing for months, without any valid reason that I could understand or accept as fair or loving, creating distance where there should have been natural closeness and shared joy between generations of our family. James looked back and forth between the two of us with dawning comprehension on his face, his expression shifting from confusion to realization as he connected the legal terms with our family dynamics of recent months. He had been so busy and preoccupied with his demanding work schedule that he honestly hadn't fully noticed how systematically Chloe was keeping me separated from our baby all these months, though he'd seen glimpses and heard comments he'd chosen to ignore or explain away until now. The legal document made the pattern undeniable, bringing into sharp focus what had been gradually occurring at the edges of his awareness, forcing him to confront a reality he had perhaps been avoiding for the sake of domestic peace. Chloe stood up abruptly from her chair, her movement sharp and angry, and sharply declared they were leaving immediately, calling the entire proceeding manipulative and insulting. She commanded James to come with her right now in a tone she rarely used with him, expecting immediate compliance, as had typically been their pattern. For the very first time in their relationship that I had witnessed, he didn't immediately obey her demand, didn't rise to follow her toward the door as she clearly expected. He stayed thoughtfully seated in his chair, thinking deeply about everything he had just heard and witnessed between us during this revealing meeting, weighing his wife's reaction against the terms of the document and what they revealed about our family situation. "Mom," he finally said quietly after a long silence, his voice filled with mixed emotions of concern, confusion, and perhaps a touch of shame. "Is this legal condition really necessary between family members? Can't we work this out without bringing lawyers and inheritance into our relationship?" I told him honestly that yes, it was completely necessary now, because normal grandmothers get to hold their grandchildren whenever they want, to comfort them when they cry, to rock them to sleep. Normal grandmothers get to build precious memories with them over the years, watching them grow and being part of their lives in meaningful ways. I had been cruelly denied that basic natural right repeatedly and systematically, and I refused to be denied any longer without taking appropriate action to protect what little time I might have to build a relationship with my granddaughter before childhood slipped away. The following week, to my considerable surprise given her angry departure, Chloe actually called me on the telephone herself, her number appearing on my caller ID with unexpected timing. Her voice sounded sweet and friendly, the way it had briefly been when she first started dating James years earlier, before marriage and motherhood had changed our dynamic. She warmly invited me over to their house to see Sophia that very afternoon, suggesting I come right away while the baby was awake and alert. She specifically said I could hold her precious granddaughter as long as I wanted to during my visit, with no time restrictions whatsoever for the first time ever. Her tone suggesting this was a spontaneous gesture of family harmony rather than the calculated response to legal pressure it clearly represented. When I arrived at their home precisely 30 minutes later, my heart beating with nervous anticipation, Chloe actually handed me the baby immediately without me even having to ask first, placing Sophia gently in my waiting arms with a smile that almost looked genuine. She even made us tea and chatted pleasantly about how she genuinely wanted Sophia to properly know her grandmother as she grew up, describing future visits and activities we might share together. The dramatic change in her behavior was remarkable to witness, a complete reversal from her previous attitude and restrictions. But I knew deep in my heart that it wasn't genuine affection or sudden family feeling motivating her sudden change of heart toward me and my relationship with my granddaughter. I finally held my granddaughter properly for the first time, breathing in that sweet, unique baby smell that grandmothers cherish, feeling the solid warmth of her small body against mine, a feeling I had dreamed of for months. I knew Chloe's sudden change of heart came from financial greed rather than genuine love or family feeling, a response to legal pressure rather than moral realization. But as little Sophia wrapped her tiny, perfect hand around my finger and looked up at me with trusting, innocent eyes, I found I didn't care about the reasons or motivations behind this change anymore. I had my granddaughter safely in my arms at last, and I knew with certainty that I would never have to fight to hold her again, that the legal framework I had created would ensure our relationship could grow and flourish despite earlier obstacles. Sometimes in life, you simply have to use whatever tools you have available to get what should have been given freely and lovingly from the very beginning, turning practical solutions into bridges for emotional connection when natural pathways have been deliberately blocked.